First of all, I want to thank you all for making it here for the Readers Theatre. I'm pleased to see the great turnout for this event. First of all, I want to acknowledge the presence of my research participants, without whom this research would not have been possible. I'm also delighted to have present here all my dissertation committee members, Dr. Robler, who is my advisor and the chair of the committee. I have Dr. Simmons here, I have Dr. Saunders here, and I have Dr. Billings here as well. I'm also delighted to have some of my colleagues here and others who have made time to be here because they have a passion for theater. And of course, my cast and crew are here to attempt to bring the core data to life. I want to give a special acknowledgement to my funders. This research was, it's being funded by the Institute for African American Research and the support to promote advancement of research and creativity, SPARC for short, sponsored by the Vice President for Research. Now, my research is in two phases. Phase one was mainly qualitative data collection using individual in-depth interviews. Phase two is the Readers Theatre. And the Readers Theatre is based on the analysis of the qualitative data collected in phase one. The specific objectives for the Readers Theatre are as follows: to pilot test the feasibility of using Readers Theatre with African American HIV care providers to validate qualitative data, to disseminate research findings to research participants, and three, to document the process for lessons learned and for future application. I have given out notebooks. If you don't have, notepads for taking notes, please let us know and then we can give you some. We also have pens, and feel free to take notes during the reading. After the reading, I will open the floor for general comments and suggestions. Specifically, I would like all of you, I would like to know from all of you what you think about using this approach to validate qualitative data and to disseminate research information. Because of the constraints, because of time constraints, we may not be able to have a lengthy discussion. So probably, how many minutes can we have?
The reading is going to probably take 30 minutes. Okay. So you can have maybe an extra 10 or 15 minutes afterwards.
Yeah, so the open discussion would take roughly 15 minutes because I still need to engage my participants in a focus group discussion. So feel free to take notes and make comments. After the general discussion, I would ask that you leave so that I can have time with the participants for further discussion. The committee can stay if time would allow them. So, on this note, I want to turn the mic back, even though I'm not using mic. I want to turn the floor back to Sean. Thank you very much.
All right, first of all, let me, you can go ahead, come back, Chris. First of all, everybody to me is like on pins and needles. Please loosen up. Please relax. Please, like I tell my actors, exhale and breathe. Because everybody's like, come on. Because my thing is, I want you to relax. Because like I said, this is interactive theater. Interactive theater is where everybody breaks fourth wall. That means the actors is breaking fourth wall. You all are breaking fourth wall. Have you ever watched reality TV and you're actually home talking back to the TV? Now come on, I know everybody in here has watched reality TV. I've watched Amazing Grace. I'm missing Survivor probably tonight. I love Survivor. There's the Real Housewife franchise. So come on, everybody has done it. I want people to relax, loosen up, talking back to the actors or the characters that are going to be portrayed. Because this is theater. Yes, this is based on Chris's research, but this is theater. And if you're all uptight, you're not going to really enjoy it. The talk back, and I've done the interactive theater, and I've also had my plays actually evaluated by the Ford Foundation. And this is a very successful thing. This is something different with doing a reading, which we've never done before. So without further ado, we're going to sit back, and we're going to listen and participate and breathe and enjoy Courtesy Stigma. Thank you. All right. The setting, a single podium with a microphone parallel to the audience, but facing chairs in the opposite end. Next to the podium is a single chair. People start walking on stage, greeting each other. A single person enters with a folder. She approaches the podium and places the folder on the stand and adjusts the microphone.
Ladies and gentlemen, if we could take our seats, the presentation is about to begin. Is this thing turned on? Excuse me? Excuse me? Could you please take your seats? The meeting is about to begin. Thank you. Thank you. We are overwhelmed at your response for participation. I know you all have very busy schedules, as well as myself, and I want to utilize our time as efficiently as possible. Before I start with the official presentation...
Excuse me. I read the letter and reviewed the draft agenda that was sent to my office, but I have one question. Is my organization's funding being cut?
That's what this presentation is
I
about.
would like to know the same thing.
I'm sure all of you have lots of questions, but if we can...
Listen. I've heard the same song and dance over and over again.
Yes.
And as you said, you want to utilize our time more efficiently. So we need to get straight to the point.
Right.
Booger, I would like to know if my funding is getting cut.
Well, this meeting is to address the possibility of all your organization's funding either being reduced or eliminated.
What?
Now, you see, we feel there is not much need for your type of services to the community. Your services make a lot of people uncomfortable, and the polls are saying that it would be in our best interest to eliminate funding to the majority of the organizations who would offer your type of service, and have possibly one organization, but with a reduction in staff at that organization, that we can in some way offer your type of services to the community. We believe with philanthropist donations that may assist with...
Why do you keep saying type of services?
Your type.
Well, that is what you provide. I mean...
She's afraid to say it.
Say what?
Just say it, lady.
I don't understand.
Oh, God. She's trying to play dumb.
Really, I'm not. This meeting is about the services that you
Oh,
offer.
you're right. She's afraid to say it. I can't believe that our major funder is afraid to say one simple word.
Young lady, I'm not afraid to say anything.
Yes, you are.
I bet you $5. She'll whisper it.
I bet you 10, she'll yell it out loud once we piss her off.
I'll add 20. She won't say it at all.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, let's be professional.
That's it. We are professionals.
Okay, I know you all have a very unique set of skills in this type of environment that you work in.
I'm tired of this show. Our services are assisting people who are living with HIV/AIDS. What's so hard in saying that?
Oh, I knew he couldn't keep his mouth closed.
Right,
I just
right.
wanted to see if I would win my bet.
Right.
You owe us all money.
Right. Don't you get tired of funders tiptoeing around what we do?
Sir, I'm not tiptoeing. I believe you don't have to broadcast every little detail in what you do. I mean, you all must and should be commended for the effort you put forth in keeping up with your workload. Just the other day, our committee in DC was saying it takes a unique person to work with those type of people.
Those type of people?
Let's get out of here.
Wait a minute. Where are you going? Why are you leaving? Don't you want to know the outcome? Listen.
Lady, now, if you don't get your hands off of me in the next 5 seconds, I may forget that I'm a lady and a professional and might have to pop you upside the head.
I am so tired of stigma.
Stigma?
I feel you have no idea. Stigma affects those of us working in the HIV field.
Well, I understand. HIV and stigma have always gone hand in hand. Your job must really be sad. I mean, it puts you in the public light with no room to conceal anything.
Sad. We love our work and we enjoy what we do. Come here, let's just talk to you for a second. Come here, let me get a chair so you can sit down and we can tell you a couple of things. Have a seat, have a seat.
I'm sorry. Okay, I did not mean to offend anyone. Well, why don't you tell me about your experience with stigma?
Before we even get to that, let's get a common understanding of what stigma really is.
A stigma comes in many shapes and forms, like people, but stigma is
Bias.
Prejudice.
Judgment.
Lack of knowledge.
ignorance.
Stigma is somebody that doesn't know but wants to know but puts their own take and their own words into something that isn't actually factual and can be documented as facts versus looking it up and knowing for themselves, so they just guess and talk. It's negativity in the strongest sense. You all sit down and you decide who gets what,
Right.
and you throw false compliments to us about our work.
Yes.
I don't see this as work, but
Calling.
yes, strange, but a calling.
A calling that has a price.
A price of what?
Being like every person who is diagnosed with you, having a label attached to my name. Can you imagine having people walk away from you just because of the type of job you did?
Or treat you different. You know, when I went over to my friend's house for a get-together, we started talking about where we all work. I spoke up and said, I worked at a community center. The questions kept coming, and then I finally told them the center provides services to people who are living with HIV and AIDS. At first, I could have sworn there was a gasp among a few people, then a silence.
Yeah, I've experienced that too.
I mean, I have too, but not with my friends.
Right.
Then when it came time to eat, can you believe my food was served on a paper plate? With a paper cup and a plastic fork? I called my friend's attention to it. I said, Gene, why am I being served with a paper plate, a cup, and a plastic fork? Gene tried to cover it up. Said, Chris, I'm sorry. We've run out of plates and cups. I hope you don't mind. Well, everyone else had china plates and cups and steel forks and knives. I was expected to accept that cooked up story she made up about having run out of plates and cups and forks.
Wow. At least you had a disposable paper cup. When my aunt found out I worked with people who had HIV, I was overwhelmed.
I heard her tell her daughter to make sure they throw away the fork, my plate, and my glass. When I looked in her direction to acknowledge I could hear them, they tried to play it off. Don't they have that?
I had a different encounter with stigma with family and friends. I was unemployed for about 6 months, then I finally got a job at an HIV center. My family was very excited when I finally shared that I had a job. One day I met my sister for lunch and we started talking about the emotional strain of just looking for a job. I told her my new job was very exciting and that I even had a business card. She asked to see my card, and when I showed it to her, she got unusually quiet and stared at the card and then me. Then she had the audacity to ask, "Is there something you need to tell me?"
Oh, I know where this is going.
I said, "No. Do you like my business card?" My sister was still acting suspicious and said, "Are you sure there's nothing you want to share with me?" I was puzzled. And when we finished our lunch and came outside, I asked her what she was talking about. She finally decided to let the cat out of the bag. "Do you have HIV?" she said. "What makes you think I have HIV?" I said. Then she acted all innocent and said, "Oh, you don't? I'm sorry, but why are you working with those people living with HIV?" After I gave her the right act, then I took time to start educating her about HIV, AIDS, and stigma. I knew I had my job cut out for me with educating my family about that disease.
You know, I do understand. I encountered the same thing, but in a different manner. I was at the store buying some office supplies. There was a clerk helping me to locate my items, and he was very helpful and pleasant. When I found everything I needed, I started walking over to the checkout counter, and the other cashier was busy, so the same clerk who assisted me offered to check out my items at another register. I thought it was very nice, and we continued our conversation. When I was done checking out my items, I handed him my business card. Suddenly, his whole demeanor changed. He was staring at me and wouldn't even hand me my bags. It was clear that what he inferred from the business card I gave him was that I was HIV positive. A business card alone is sufficient to change a usual and normal person to a tainted person? I just looked at him and tried to talk about my organization. He wasn't even trying to have another conversation with me. He mumbled he had something to do and walked away. The funny thing is, I'm not even HIV positive, but I might as well have HIV as well. I was blown away by that. I mean, just handing somebody a business card can change a person's perception.
I guess that's how people living with HIV and AIDS feel. Ostracized. You get treated with normalcy, and then when someone finds out your status, the prediction and treatment changes. I can't even imagine living and feeling like that every day for the rest of your life.
But they do. That's why I feel driven to work hard to educate communities about HIV and AIDS. I want to help dispel the myths and teach them facts. But that ugly word, stigma, keeps rearing its head, and it seems like when I make 2 steps forward, someone's stigma or perception makes me take 5 steps back.
That's the school of hard knocks, and it has taught me how to circle the wagons. I hate to admit this, and y'all don't get me wrong. I love my family and hanging out with my friends, but a lot of times I find myself socializing with my coworkers and sometimes clients who work at my organization. At least I don't have to wonder what questions I'm going to be asked about working with people living with HIV and AIDS, or feel like people are watching what they say because they don't want to offend me.
That's very true.
But you know, I try not to isolate myself socially either, because I believe I'll get discouraged. And I just can't let myself get discouraged. We can't be discouraged, y'all. I mean, people living with HIV and AIDS, especially African Americans, need a voice to keep telling our communities that we are not a threat to them.
Not only people who have HIV, but also the professionals who work for and with them are not to be ostracized.
Exactly.
Have you ever dealt with the stupid questions? Like, how does it feel to work with people like that?
Every day.
Or are they different? Aren't you scared that you will catch HIV? Then someone gets really smart and says, he must have it, that's why he's working with those people.
Well, you do, don't you?
You're joking, right? For your record, no. I don't have HIV. This is deja vu. I had a session about counseling and getting tested for HIV. I had handouts for the participants to sign and return to me so I could test it. As I was in the process of passing out the material, the papers got stuck. So I had a habit of licking my papers to help separate the papers. Everyone was signing the paper except for this one participant. I asked her, "Why aren't you signing the paper?" She responded, "You just talked about HIV and you put saliva on my paper. I'm not signing that." I was stunned.
I told you stigma is generated by ignorance.
Right.
Think about it. Were you really stunned or just wanted to be
Yes,
stunned?
I was. This affected my job. By the participant not signing the consent form, she couldn't be tested. She didn't realize that without her consent form, I could not test her for HIV because by not having that form in our files places a huge liability on our organization. We could be sued for testing someone for HIV without their consent.
I do understand about circumstances making you wonder what's going on with people's judgment. We had a cleaning company come in and clean a big stain on the carpet in our conference room. We had a reception and some punch and food was wasted on the floor and we couldn't get the stains up. So when the office manager called the company, they gave us a really good competitive rate. And she told them, "Come on, right on over." And when they came over to our office and saw the sign about what we do and the stains on the floor, do you know they flat out refused to clean our carpet? Yeah, we had to call around and find another company who would do the service.
Carpet cleaning, huh? What about refusing to do our website because of the information we wanted listed? Our website developer was very reasonable and they initially put up our site and maintained it for us. But then the developer's company changed owners. When we wanted to add additional services for MSMs, the new owner said that what we wanted listed was against their beliefs, and they would no longer be able to support our website.
That's just another example of prejudice and judgment. Stigma.
That's right. And like you said, I shouldn't be surprised, but sometimes I find myself wondering, when will the negative perception and the stigma end? You know, I spoke with my pastor about an opportunity to bring an HIV program to our church. And he supported the idea and started working to implement the program. But then the rumors started circulating that he was gay and had HIV.
In the church?
Yeah, in the church. And you know, it started from a church member who supposedly volunteered to be the lead for the program. She told someone, and they told someone, and so on and so on.
So, how did things turn out?
Let's just say my church started doing less and less HIV education and awareness. And eventually, my pastor moved to another church. So you see how ignorance and fear can influence rational people into making irrational and wrong assumptions.
Well, I'm a pastor. I remember not long ago, I met with another local pastor through Project Faith. I told this pastor that we would love for their church to be involved with the faith component of HIV/AIDS in their church and healthcare ministry. Then the pastor automatically assumed I was HIV positive. He asked me, "How long have you had the disease?" At first, I didn't understand his question, so I asked him, "How long have I been working in the field?" He said, "No." "How long have you been living with HIV?" I told him I wasn't living with HIV. The pastor was surprised to hear that I didn't have HIV. "You're not HIV positive?" I told him just because I work with the HIV organization doesn't mean that I have HIV or that I'm a homosexual. It's a job and it's a calling that God has given me at this time, and I'm going to fulfill it to the call and the best of my abilities.
You would think pastors would at least be insulated against stigma. It makes you wonder if any pastor who supports our work or assists people living with HIV/AIDS is stigmatized as well.
You know, this sort of thing can be tiresome. To some people, it's almost as if basic human kindness and the desire to help people living with HIV/AIDS is not a welcome idea. What do you think?
You know, I've come to the realization that you can't control people's mouths. But I have had an encounter with the trainer at the gym.
Girl, you going to a gym?
Yeah, I've been going for a while.
I can tell you're trimming down some. You have to give me your trainer's number.
Girl, thanks. But not that trainer or gym.
I thought he was doing wonders for you.
Well, he was until he wanted me to tell who I knew that had HIV.
What?
Look, I met with my trainer, and I had on my organization's t-shirt, which says we are an HIV/AIDS organization. When I saw my trainer ready to start my workout, he noticed my t-shirt and asked, what is that about? I told him I work with people living with HIV/AIDS. He said, really? I know one of the members that come to your organization. I didn't respond, but the trainer wouldn't let it go. Then he proceeded to ask me about any other people or well-known community people who may have HIV. He even called over another trainer while he was asking the questions. Then he started telling the other trainer, I work with people living with HIV/AIDS.
Doesn't he know that's confidential information?
I thought so. But the real question is, did he care that it was or was not confidential information?
So what did you do?
Tried to ignore him.
Well, did it work?
Child, no. That man kept hounding me, and he wasn't going to tell. He kept hounding me saying he wasn't going to tell anybody. I told him I was not jeopardizing my job or anyone's confidentiality, and I didn't want to talk about it. Besides, a friend of mine who is a nurse goes to the same trainer, and I guarantee you he doesn't ask her about her patients' medical conditions or treatments. Why me? Why did he think I was interested in that sort of conversation? I get asked that type of question all the time. People meet me, and when I tell them I work with people living with HIV/AIDS, then they want to know, who are the people with HIV?
Well, did the trainer change the conversation after seeing your reluctance?
No, I did. I got my gym bag and I left.
Good for
No,
you.
that's right.
I never went back to that place, but I did find another gym and train.
All right, girl, go now.
You know what? I sometimes hate being referred to as those people who work with those kinds of people. Or, here goes those HIV people.
Right.
You know, it doesn't bother me about having my personal identity linked with someone who has HIV, but it's like, what happens to my own identity? Why can't I just choose to work in this field because I care?
Do you really care?
I do care.
Why? Because you are and they are African Americans?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I am an African American, but I'm also a human being.
Yes.
I can identify with my culture, but I can't begin to describe how it is to see your friend or family member sick and dying from AIDS. I mean, watching people whisper, talk, and knowing all of this could be prevented by getting tested and knowing your status, but afraid.
Afraid of what?
Afraid of you.
Me? Yes, you. They are all afraid of you. People come in our office and afraid of hearing those 3 words. You have HIV.
The fear is so strong until they would rather not know if they have you or not.
Why on earth are they afraid? I mean, look at me. I look healthy, strong, I'm smart, resourceful. What have I done?
Destroyed lives.
Hopes.
And dreams.
You give me too much power.
They do.
We did, but no more. Really? Aren't you frightened of me? No. Are you sure? No pun intended. I'm sure, I'm positive. Then answer this question. All of you. Do you have HIV?
Does it matter?
No, but answer the question.
Why?
Why? Are you ashamed or afraid to disclose your status? I know you get the questions every time you present or talk to someone about HIV.
I do, but I never let anyone censure me into talking about HIV. I had to present for an organization, and they wanted to tell me what I could or couldn't say about HIV because my presentation may be a little too
risque.
Exactly.
Or what did you do?
I left and I told the group who invited me that until they wanted to hear the truth and not fairy tales about HIV, then consider having me back. You know, all truth passes through 3 stages. First, it's ridicule. Second, it's violently opposed. And third, it's accepted as being self-evident.
You got that right.
That's right.
That's true, but you know, at least you had a job you could go to. I got set up and fired from my job because of my involvement with HIV and not willing to compromise the truth. I was ostracized and systematically set up with the choice to be quiet and do what I was told or to be unemployed.
What did you do?
Let's just say that when I was unemployed, that was one of the loneliest times of my life. I felt isolated and misunderstood, but deep in my heart, I knew I was doing the right thing.
For people you didn't know, and a disease
For people who could have been me.
And I don't see the relevance of the question, if I do or do not have HIV, what difference would it make? But for the record, no, I don't have HIV.
What? You don't have HIV? Then why? I mean, why are you?
Working with these people. We said it before. It's a calling. Divine appointment.
Right.
I don't believe in God.
Well, when you start seeing some of the things that happen in the lives of our clients, you start believing that there is a God or a higher power, something or someone that gives you hope.
Have you ever been there when someone is diagnosed with HIV? It doesn't matter if they are young or old, male or female.
Straight or gay, the disbelief, shock, tears, sometimes cussing and yelling.
That's the hardest part of my job. Giving a positive diagnosis and seeing the reaction. A lot of times it's heart-wrenching watching a client's reaction. Some days I don't know if I can keep doing this, y'all. I feel like I'm getting burned out. There are so many people being diagnosed with HIV. But when I sit and think that I'm too tired to continue working with people living with HIV, something inside of me inspires me to keep going, to keep living, to keep giving hope.
Yes.
Our clients are different and have to be treated differently, meaning you don't shake your head and say, next person.
Right.
We stay there. We talk to them. We listen to them. Sometimes we cry with them, hug them, we laugh with them. But above all, we show unconditional love to them.
And if that isn't God, I don't know what is.
I had a person stay with me all day when he was diagnosed with HIV. He knew once he walked out of that door, what I told him would be reality. Rather than chase him out and say I had other things to do, which I did, I let him linger and stay all day until I knew he was all right. And ma'am, the most rewarding thing is watching a person who has no hope call back with a smile on their voice or watch them walk through the door with renewed hope.
Doesn't seem like such a big sacrifice.
It isn't. When you see their smile or get a hug.
I have no regrets in working with people living with HIV and AIDS. No regrets. That's why I will take being referred to as the HIV lady or the person talking about HIV as long as I have a chance to stop someone from being infected with you. It's all worth it.
You may not be afraid, but I do know someone who is.
Ooh.
You!
I'm not afraid of HIV.
You sure?
Yes.
Okay. Then you will have no problem in admitting.
I have nothing to admit.
I think you do.
Do you have HIV?
No!
Okay, well, you don't have to be so defensive.
I'm not being defensive.
She's hiding something.
Will you be quiet?
At first, I'm quiet. I'll even hide for a while. Then all of a sudden,
BOOM! What in the world?
My son has HIV.
bingo, I'm out.
And you have?
Stigma. I guess so. No one knows. My son is gay. I knew for years, but I made him live a lie. I told him his sexual orientation could and would ruin his career and family. So he lived in secrecy, and when he found out that he had HIV, he almost... That's why I joined the committee. I wanted to learn more about the disease and try to help in some way, but all I learned was to hide in even more shame and secrecy. Your discussion about HIV and stigma is an eye-opener. I didn't realize what you all have to put up with working in your careers. I can see how stigma can taint someone's view of a person or disease. It tainted mine, and it destroyed my family.
You know, cancer was once a disease that carried stigma. Nobody talked about someone who was diagnosed or died with cancer. But after years of education and research, the perception changed. We are trying to do the same thing with HIV.
It's not easy. HIV has been around almost 30 years, and people are still afraid of a big disease with such a small name. What we need for you to do is stop thinking of this disease as a black person's disease.
I don't.
Yes, you do. When HIV was first really talked about, the face of that disease was a gay white male. Then there was an abundance of money pouring in from Washington, and organizations were getting on board to help with funding. But when the face of HIV started getting darker, and including African American women and men, the whole funding game changed.
Exactly. If I was a white male, even a gay white male, do you know I would get funding faster than being a black female? Oh, and let's not talk about if I was a black male and happened to be gay.
Now,
Listen. I'm gay, and honey, being black and gay ain't no cakewalk. It's like I got 3 strikes. Strike 1, I'm black. Strike 2, a black male. And strike 3, a gay black male.
why do you always think race is such a factor?
It is.
It is not. When HIV first came to the forefront, it was almost hysteria. We had to do something to control and calm the masses. Philanthropists, donors, and researchers made HIV a top priority.
And when HIV became blacker?
Young man, we're in the midst of a recession. We just don't have the funds like we used to.
Lady, tell that to someone else.
We really don't.
And I have a summer home on Mars that I'm flying to. Many HIV organizations need money for their programs, but you keep telling us the same cock and bull story about the lack of money.
Right.
Money is not available because you all think HIV is a black disease. If it was a white man's disease, there would be money for it. You cut funding for HIV programs that are supposed to help protect and save people's lives, but you can fund a day in the park for dogs. You can fund a balloon event. You can fund all these programs that don't save human life, but cut funding for drugs to keep people alive. You can snatch a dog on the streets and say it has been abused. A dog that has no soul abused.
That's what they do.
But a human being who can't get their HIV medicine or treatment, isn't that abuse?
And you know, the state can fund a golf tournament, but they won't fund HIV/AIDS programs.
Right.
They deliberate about what HIV programs or organizations to close down. This is discrimination.
Yes.
It's misplaced priorities.
That's not true.
Okay.
Okay, with the money you have received from us, has it helped? Are your efforts working? I mean, if they're not, it's not my fault you have barriers.
It may not be your fault, but it's not the time to throw in the towel, right?
Right.
Part of the problem is money. The other part is having necessary resources. But the biggest part is stigma.
There is no definitive answer to what is stigma.
Stigma is everything and more.
Stigma is somebody's somewhere talking about things that aren't true.
Stigma, ma'am, is you.
Me?
Yes, you. Here you are forcing your son to deny who he really is. And by the ignorance of stigma, you may have contributed to his infection with HIV. Then you are making him keep his disease hidden because you are afraid of the shame that it causes you and your family. That's cruel, and that's not love. Love is compassion. Love is acceptance, unconditionally. It's one thing to stigmatize people who have HIV, but you stigmatized us when you walked in to present to us.
You did.
You saw that we were black and automatically assumed that we were HIV positive, choosing to work with people living with HIV and AIDS rather than just seeing people who are just passionate about their work and beliefs. People who desire to make a better community for those who are sick and dying by giving them a new lease on life or an option to live in hope. You are the worst kind of stigma. Someone who lumps everyone into the same category, rather than believing that people still care.
I don't know what to say.
Tell your colleagues, we care, and we need help, and we love what we do. Tell them about what is stigma. Do you know what stigma is? Do you? Do you?
Then tell your story.
How should our story end?
Should she cut out funding? Or is there another way to convince her about what is stigma? A courtesy stigma.
What do you think?
Amen. Normally I do, but I'm going to call their characters and let them introduce themselves. The woman presenter.
Hello everyone, my name is Aluah, and I was the funder or the grantor in this work.
All right, and from one of the participants in Chris's research, the character Brenda was portrayed by.
Hello, I'm Celeste Moore.
Another character, Paul, was portrayed by.
Hi, I'm Michael Clark.
The next character, Chris, was portrayed by.
Good evening, I'm Chadwick Presley.
The character, Carrie, was portrayed by.
My name is Risha Fraxton.
And the character of Minnie was portrayed by.
My name is Stacey Jennings.
And last but not least, I'm going to stress the character portrayed by HIV.
Lynette Thompson.
And I am yours truly, the director and the writer of this wonderful piece. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. I mean, you have your notepads and so forth. I'm going to bring Chris up, and he's going to facilitate the other part of the question and answers. And I always do with the Readers Theater, and I have to do this because this is something that we do monthly or at least every other month. What inspired you with this research? I can't ask myself as what inspired me to write it because your research inspired me to write this. But what inspired you to do this? And we're going to kick it off from that point of view.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll give them another round.
Thank you very much. So, I have always been interested in HIV and stigma. So, like any PhD candidate, I was looking for a topic. I wanted to do something that would make a significant contribution to the literature and to improve knowledge. But looking at the impact of stigma among individuals living with HIV, I realized that there was too much research done in that area. And then somebody, I brought up the topic with a colleague who suggested that I look at the impact of stigma among family members of people living with HIV. And this person happened to be one of them. Their sister died of HIV. And I don't want to go into the details of that. So I decided to do a quick literature review, but I realized that there was a relatively large research in that area as well. And I just didn't want to be adding to what was already done. But in the course of the review, I came across two publications, one in 2008 and the other in 2011 by Dr. Alison Lips in the UK, which said that nurses providing medical abortion have greater demands placed upon them, and these demands may be increased by the stigma associated with the practice. So that set me thinking that probably I should look at something in the area of HIV. So a quick review in that area showed that there was very little done in that field. So that was what made me to focus on the stigmatization of people providing services to those living with HIV/AIDS. But the theater piece is because I have a background in theater. I've actually done undergraduate studies in theater for 6 years, and I've always had a passion for it, and which is why I wanted to pull that along in my research career. So that's why I have merged the two together. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Because this is your opportunity to research. One question I always like to ask people when we do Reader's Theater, because Reader's Theater to me is an opportunity. When we do live theater and the show is over and you greet the actors or the director and the applause, you never have a chance, an opportunity to talk in detail about the piece. You get in your cars, you talk about the piece in more detail. I'm one of the co-coordinators for the Reader's Theater at the National Black Theater Festival. And we added a component every 2 years where we do comment cards. And I don't have comment cards, but we have the sheets. And one thing that Chris doesn't realize is many years ago, some of your participants know that I've done extensive research in HIV/AIDS. We're writing 3 pieces that deal with HIV/AIDS. And one of my presentations that I did at an international colloquium and a workshop at the festival was how the World Health Organization uses the interactive theater to reach areas in Africa, Asia, Canada, and South America, especially in Africa and Asia, because the countries are so remote. So they take theater, and it's interactive, meaning that they start off with the basis like this started off. However, they leave it open-ended for the audience to figure out or to fill in the blanks, what was missing. And that was the end purpose of this. And I always like that component because you guys are familiar with To Touch God's Hands. And To Touch God's Hands was evaluated by Dr. Pryor from the University of Illinois, Ford Foundation, but it has so many different components. This is a condensed version of his research. It was very extensive. And sitting there, I had to figure out, all that information. I call them gems. It was so much information. What was going to be the common denominator to tie it all together and to marry? I use that term. I like to use different analogies of how to marry the two together. Because I believe in edutainment. I believe in entertainment first. But if I put an umbrella up, there's that education piece. Because a lot of people, because we're in the South, do not want to talk about HIV. Because the first thing you still think is HIV is a gay disease, or is a very promiscuous woman that caught the disease. So this is an opportunity that I'm painting a picture and building this foundation for us to really seriously talk about. You have the past, but you didn't answer the question. They set the foundation for you, the actors and the piece. What would you do?
Now I want her to go. I want to really hit her heart, but I want to see it go along with like her going back to her.
Yeah.
So you wanted another act two?
Yeah.
You
Going
want
back
act
to
two?
her office, talking to her people.
Y'all ready for act two?
Yeah. Explaining to her people the struggle they did, what happens to them, and what they talked about, and her actually fighting for them to keep the funding there with those people. I want to go on longer with the funding and her fighting to get the funding. That's the side I want to see.
But is that fantasy or reality?
Fantasy.
Well, that's fantasy.
Fantasy.
I know it's fantasy. I love fantasy too. Fantasy makes a great play.
It was over here. Can I get you there?
Ideally, the guilt that individual funder felt, if she had internalized it personally, and it's fantasy, I believe, she would have, as she kept asking the other individual, "Are you HIV positive?" She would have related her own story of her son, and gone back to try to get funding.
Fantasy or reality? Because it looked like she was frightened. We were rehearsing.
Ideally, it'd be great if it was reality, but more likely it wouldn't happen.
All right, I saw a hand here.
Well, I would like to see the presenter get more education, and I would see the steps on it, and her eyes opening as she goes through the different steps on being educated and realizing what the stigmas are, and actually seeing them herself, and maybe she can pull out of.
So I see an act two developing from what everybody's saying.
Sounds great. Yes,
I don't know about great, but that's what I'm seeing the audience is saying. We want to see act two.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
And from the I think from the fantasy of her telling the story, the reality is that she still, even if she would have gone back to tell the others, then I think she would have just gone back to face more stigma and from others, within her professional funding realm. However, the reality of Act 3. Now we're on the 3. Act 3 might be to show, but if she would push, even in small ways, maybe it would not impact, all of the funders, but you still can make a difference. Even
the transition from when the presenter was listening to suddenly revealing all about her son seemed too abrupt to me. It wasn't believable. And so carrying on with the idea of a second and a third act, what I think would be really powerful is if the presenter in that, what we're now deciding is the first act, simply listened and said, I will go back to the office and contemplate. Then as you were saying, the second act could be back in the office and trying to convince her coworkers and her other funders that, these people are really doing a good job, it's needed, blah, blah, blah. And then in a third act, at the very end, revealing why she was motivated.
Exposing
about her son.
Her son.
Yeah, at the very end.
So if we were really in an African village or an Asian village, we would be having someone actually coming up acting your Act 2 and Act 3. Because then it would be, I would say, okay, woman presenter, come back up. Then you come up and you have that conversation as a character, a new, brand new character, saying, how do you feel? How did your trip go? What do you think? That's improv right off the top of your head. Because then you would become a part of helping to resolve and write the ending of that. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to see the presenter thinking before she chooses to act fantasily or realitily. That's mean after, because I think the talk like this communication with other people have struck has driven her a lot, especially in concern with her son. And I like the part that when the woman points out that that is you who, like the way she stigmatized and hidden the truth that her son is gay and then affected with HIV. So I imagine that when she returned home, like being by herself and all kind of things, like how this like stigmatized have formed and then affect and destroy her son and her family, and it will be make a big change. Like when she like really think and face herself with no others, like including like face with conscience,
Okay.
and those kind of things. So and it is also like with any people, like the audience, because we also like be in the same place with that presenter. We also have that kind of information and we kind of reflection, and we will make decision that we will act fantasily, that we will fight for no more stigmatized for HIV, or we will like just like okay.
When health providers are asked, do you have HIV or are you HIV positive? The answer, like, it doesn't matter, it shouldn't matter. But for the record, I don't like that need, to reveal it out. So I'm thinking how like deep maybe it is the internalization of that stigma, even among people who are strongly against what's going on, how it's affecting people with HIV and their families. And maybe like the fantasy part of it, a time would come, all of those providers would refuse in a very comfortable way not to answer that question. So like, what's the impact of that? That's
So you think
like
the
need
provider should have
for.
said, I'm not going to answer that question. If we did some things, I'm not going to answer that question because I think it's not even part of why I should be considered.
Yeah, so it felt to me, even from the play, that it still matters. It matters. It speaks to some anxiety, I think we would say it's internalization of that stigma. It speaks to some life, so it's like, I don't have it, but, that comes first. So.
Yeah, I thought it would be interesting if she went back to her son, and kind of tried to reconcile with her son. And that conversation would be an opportunity to kind of model to the audience what, reconciliation looks like, for somebody who is stigmatized, somebody within their own family. I thought that would be an emotionally kind of powerful way of, educating the audience about that. And the other question I had was just about the relative agreement between the caregivers with regard to their calling, and being kind of caregivers for HIV. People who had HIV, and were there people, for example, who didn't see it as a calling, who but saw it as a job, instead, who weren't particularly passionate?
As I never, in the research, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I read it all of it, I never saw what anybody felt like it was just a job.
Yeah, some participants put it in a different way, that it's not an 8 to 5 job. In other words, they are always out ready to work. They have to be on their toes. Whatever matters that they need to do, they have to do it. And some literally said it's the calling.
It always God. God
Yeah,
always kept the divine appointment of God kept popping up in research.
Most of them saw the divine hand of God in their work as influencing whatever they do.
And I thought we both thought that was, and when I was reading research, I know you thought it was interesting. I thought it was very interesting that you have people who are very passionate and do see it as some kind of calling, a divine calling of God was associated in those research findings. It was all.
So I want to come in here because I don't want to keep the general participants waiting. I issued a question at the beginning. It's just, I'm just inviting your general comments, specifically how appropriate the Reader's Theatre is for the objectives outlined in the paper. One, for validating qualitative data, and two, for sharing research information. So I'm just inviting comments from the general audience.
So I've done a lot of qualitative research, and you always end up with pages and pages of transcripts, and then you look at it and go, you're just, it's golden, but what do you do with it in ways that really speak to people? Because that, in the end, is the goal, I think. You know, so it's either through theater or through documentary or some sort of transformation. We can publish our articles in peer-reviewed journals and such, and that is very important. That speaks to a very small audience. And so I think to be able to bring together research and theater, and sometimes those are people with very different training, but then to bridge those, that's how you get the messages out. Otherwise you're left with, and you can come to my office and see my filing cabinets filled with transcripts. You know, there's a lot there to be done with. So, and just, you know, with the study that Chris has done, this is, how many people did you end up interviewing total?
90.
90, yeah.
Yeah.
So just right there is.
In fact, circumstances beyond my control happened just the past 2 days before this event. So, in fact, the whole of last week, so I couldn't make a follow-up to actually call people to come. That's why we had a few, and you agree with me that people need to really be reminded. So that's why we have a few people, a few participants here. But I was expecting at least 12 of them here. So the floor is so open if you have questions related to how appropriate this approach is for validating qualitative data or for sharing research information. In this case, the Reader's Theatre is a catalyst for discussing the research findings. Yeah.
I was also thinking that, especially being in public health area and the research we do with communities, you know, we are always looking for some approaches that's kind of going to overcome the power hierarchy between the researcher and who is being researched, or people. You know, we claim that we are doing this for the people, and I can see this, but things don't go that way. So we are looking ways to democratize the research, to make things, to have an equal ground, to participate actively from the community side, from the researcher side, and carry it during the whole research process until it's disseminated, everything. So I can see this approach being very, very useful in that kind of research. Working with communities, you know, in this case you were working with health providers, a different group, but with communities, I can see that you could even involve community members as actors. You know, it could, I'm sure there are all kinds of other creative ways as long as people are open to trying things. So I think it's very powerful.
Okay, we will allow 2 more questions, and then you can leave.
I'm going to be very brief. I think this research theater, the quantitative part, she talks about community, talks about providers. This can be used, and I believe that this can be used, and I think we will accept this and understand this in the community, in the field of people who are funders, to let them know what goes on. This can be used in almost every field of life to get the point across. And we're talking about HIV. We're not talking about anything right now. But this whole concept we just did, I think will be appropriate anywhere, in any community, the funders, any area to get a point across. And I think this was excellent. This was excellent. I think this whole premise, your plays, the reader theater that you're talking about, excellent. It needs to be used more. In every walk of life, the profession, community, individuals who are HIV positive, people who aren't educationally, this is excellent. You'll learn a great deal from this. In this form of theater, it is excellent.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I'm kind of co-signing this. I think this is a great tool because the reason is we have the written statistics all the time. We have the things, but people don't read it. The data is there. But a lot of people are visual. They want to see a personal story that makes a big impact. And look, we're here with all those providers. We heard like 5 different personal stories. And people can sit there and they can identify with one of those stories. But when you're reading it, people don't get it. A lot of times, when you go in those communities, this is the stuff to do. This is a great tool to get those people that don't read. They don't take the time to look at those statistics. And they can identify with her story, this story. It will grab people, and it will gravitate people, and then we get them talking like you want to do. Make the conversation talk.
Okay, I think we need to break here so that I can allow the general audience to leave. But I want to say thank you very much for making time to come for this event. We really appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Which of the characters in the play did you identify with and why?
I identified with Brenda, who was on the far right, partially because she talked a lot. And I talk a lot, but also she kept expressing her mind and was very compassionate. I can't remember specifically. I'd have to look at the script again, but I liked what she said, and she was very at ease with herself.
I have to agree that I identify with Brenda also. I think that just like her character and that her straightforwardness but the compassion and all of that. And of course I identify with Paul because Paul was he was a preacher, and that's what I am. And so I know that passion I have with the ministry and to educate pastors, and because I think for a long time the church has been silent when it comes to HIV and AIDS, and I think that just was something they were, I don't know, didn't want to, I guess, join in the fight, but I know you can't be silent. We can't be silent. So I, of course, identify with him because he is from the same, we have that same calling and that compassion. And so I know that we can't just sit by. We got to be involved. And so that's one reason I identify with Paul also.
I kind of felt like I found something to identify with from many of the characters, those who were being presented to, because I think what they expressed were some very common situations and perceptions that people have about professionals in HIV, and I felt that their stories were not at all uncommon. And so, you know, as they were talking about some situations and some experiences they had, I really could, I really found something to identify with from all of them. Even the presenter, because at one time we all were that person. We all were ignorant about HIV. We all, at one time or other, had to be in a learning process. And plus the fact that one of the things that I got from her was isolation. She's isolated. And she's isolated because of stigma. And, you know, I think sometimes as professionals in HIV, we're isolated also. So I found something to identify with from several of the characters.
Okay, I could identify with Paul on one hand. That, you know, I've been out there and I've been called them AIDS people. And, you know, just the overall points that he was making, I could identify with him. You know, I understand the fact about the funding getting cut down, but because of what I went through is why, you know, I wouldn't say so much as a calling, but it's a ministry for me because of, you know, the compassion I got for that. And I want to say that when I talk about Chris. You know, I work with a program called 3MV, Many Men, Many Voices, and these are programs based on homosexual men. And my belief system is not the same as a lot of the people that be in this class. And I'm a heterosexual man. But I don't let my belief system interfere with the compassion that God has given me for this job and for the persons that I'm working with, the participants. So I could really relate to Chris and Paul.
Unfortunately, I could relate to all of them, but I could especially relate to the person who played the virus. Because sometimes I feel like when I am in the pulpit or wherever and I'm advocating for the people who are affected and infected, that people think that I am this creature that's kind of looming over, and oh, here comes that HIV lady again. So I think I related most to the virus.
Okay. I think your responses have kind of lumped several questions together. But I still want to ask, in what ways you identified with the experiences of the characters. The first question was, which of them did you identify with and why? And I know you answered the second question as well, but it's still open for discussion. So if you identified with the experiences of any of the characters, you can share that with us. You want to add something?
No, I mean, like I said before, they're very common.
Yeah. Okay, let me move on to. So during the Readers Theater, what was going through your mind?
I thought all the readers were so authentic that I felt myself believing in what I was seeing, that I thought it was real, that they were really people, that they were really the characters they said they were. And I had a hard time differentiating the character from, the fact from the fantasy, because it was just so well done that I was like, oh yeah, I've been right there with you, and then, oh, but he's just pretending.
For me, the Reader's Theater brought a closeness for the audience. That's what Reader's Theater does. I was a theater major, so Reader's Theater make it personal. It brings that closeness, and it's supposed to make you feel like you're a part of what is going on. That's what Reader's Theater does, and you felt that. I felt like I was right there with them, and I could relate to them, so I was like a part of it. And then it gives you a chance to even verbally say things out in that Reader's Theater too. So for me, it was that closeness, that realness that the Reader's Theater brought to us and I thought that was one of the best tools you could have used for your research. I thought it was just, the perfect thing. And then I'm used to the Reader's Theater because that's what we did at Columbia College. There was a lot of Reader's Theater. But the thing was to bring that closeness to you, to the participants, actors, as well as the audience. That's the purpose of it.
During the reading, I think what was going through my mind was, I remembered when that happened. And I remember some of those feelings. I just started looking out in the audience. I saw, so many familiar faces, and I was just thinking there's a lot of soldiers in this audience, and that there's a lot of battle scars and, bullet wounds and all those kinds of things, and some of them are still very fresh. So as they were going through the reading, I was just thinking about, just remembering how it felt when those things happened. So.
The realness, it made me look at, it made me realize, I go through that on a regular basis. not so much with the clients, but their family members. And or a phone call when someone called about some information. I need to know some information. I remember experiences with like many, going to a family reunion and making sure I showed special attention to someone who was infected by the virus because everybody was shying away. So it's like I was living it as they was presenting this.
Well, for myself, again, it was interesting, sad, and good to see that everybody who was interviewed, because I know that the play was a distillation of the interviews, experienced so much of what I did, although in some of the things I didn't, like no one has ever directly asked me if I had HIV. I am certain people think I do. But no one's ever had the guts to ask. So that's different from apparently some of the other people. But it was very powerful. Telling it in story, Christopher, is so powerful because all great leaders, whether it was Jesus or Muhammad or Buddha, always told their great truths through story. So this was powerful, and it was a heck of a lot more memorable, I think, y'all were saying, than just reading a report. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to rephrase this question. I would like for you to share with me your personal experience that reflect what you saw in the Regis Theater. For those of you who have already, responded to that, you don't need to answer. I know, again, in responding to the other question, you talked about how real and how most of the experiences resonated with you, and you could feel, the way the characters were feeling. So, but personal experience, what kind of personal experience can you relate to what you saw in the Regis Theater? And you all don't have to answer if you don't have an answer to it.
The only thing I can think of is that this is a calling for me. And I heard that mentioned several times. So I am called to do this ministry.
And I agree completely. This is not a job. It's a ministry, a calling. I don't care what the word is. But
yeah, that's okay. And I have to say that, Christopher, because I came out of the streets of a lifestyle of shooting drugs, having people who were infected by the virus and died using the same syringes as they use. So when I came for my first HIV test, I prepared myself in my mind to hear a diagnosis of being positive. I decided that I had to accept the fact that I used these same syringes and they had died. So I prepared myself for the positive. And when they gave me my results, and my results came back negative, in my mind, I knew that right then, this is something that I want to do for the rest of my life. And that's why I believe in the calling of the ministry. That's why I believe, because I didn't do anything different. And I looked at it as, even if I didn't die, I at least should have had the virus. So I take that personally as God's grace and mercy for me. And that's why I say it's my ministry. And I could identify with Paul.
I would have to say also that it is a calling or ministry for me as well. But what got me involved and what I saw up there was I could see my brother. It affected me personally because my brother died of complication with AIDS, and as they were talking, I could imagine all the stigmas that probably just him not wanting to go be tested. He knew something was wrong. He knew with all his heart it was, but I remember him telling me I couldn't go and I didn't want to hear that I had something because I was afraid of what people would say, all the stigmas and all of that. And so my brother didn't go get tested. And then when he finally did, it was because the family got together and said, you got to be tested, you got to go be tested because we need to know. And we got together, and it was Dr. Gaddis and Vivian who did this testing for him. I just heard about them and I went and found them, and we went together as a family for my brother to be tested, and of course it came back positive. But I heard him up there. I saw his whole story, that fear, the things that people would say, and so that fear of even just knowing. So when I was watching them, I saw him, but then I also saw that this is where I'm supposed to be. This is why we got to be educated. This is why I have to speak out, because it's up for us to touch and change lives. We got to do that, and it is a call. It is a ministry.
I don't know what to add to that. I always say this is God's work. I remember early on when, people the stigma was so great, people wouldn't even touch folk with HIV, didn't want to talk about it. So I always say that HIV chooses you. I was supposed to be in child and maternal health, and I wasn't supposed to be working in HIV. And HIV, I think, found me. And I just, have this strong desire to help vulnerable people. And at that time, that was a needy population that, didn't seem to have the support and didn't seem to have the backup that they needed. And so as a social worker, of course, that was my call, and I've just been here ever since, and I believe when it is time for me to go, God will move me to my next journey. So.
My next question is specifically to the three of you as African Americans working in the HIV field. So the question I want to ask you is to describe how the play reflects the experiences of African Americans working in the HIV field that you know of or have heard about.
Well, I think it was really accurate. Again, I remember just sitting there thinking, I remember when that happened. I remember how I felt when that happened. And I just felt like it was very accurate, unfortunately. But it is the truth. And I think sometimes when we look at the truth, it's not pretty. But we still have to deal with it as it is. So, I think that the portrayal was right on target. I think even in some cases a little light, but of course I know we're doing the edutainment, so there has to be some fantasy in there. But I felt like it was right on target, and I think it elicited the feelings of the reality. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was thinking about how when you talk to other providers and they talk about programs that they had, but the funding has been cut, and the problems that they are going through. And I remember when Miss Elizabeth used to come by, and she would bring me this list of people who were on the ADAP waiting list because of funding, and to feel what she was feeling at that time, and realizing that we all were going through this battle together, and understand that the money was going to keep being cut, but we was not going to give up the fight.
Yeah,
sure. I think that for me, one of the things that kept popping up was isolation. At one point in the play, they said something about, only socialize with the people I work with, or I tend to socialize with people that I serve, or that kind of thing. And I find that to be very true. I'm a member of a lot of organizations. I'm a pretty gregarious person, but professionally, it is very isolating, and I think that's something that we don't often think about. but that was brought out in this play, that, you know, it's isolating not only for the people living with HIV, but for those of us who have HIV as a career focus. It can be very isolating. So I was, you know, that kind of, you know, I guess brought it again to the forefront for me.
Mm-hmm. So I'm now going to ask you to rate on a scale of 0 to 10 how effective the Reader's Theater has been in portraying the stigmatization of African Americans working in the HIV field. So again, this is directed to the three of you. Oh, okay. On a scale of 0 to 10, how effective has the Reader's Theater been in portraying your experience as African Americans working in the field?
Okay, I'm going to say on a scale of 1 to 10, 0 to 10, I'm going to say an 8.
I guess for me, on a scale of 0 to 10, I thought it was head on. I thought it was the Reader's Theater was pretty accurate. I guess maybe a 9, 9.5. I thought they did a very good job. I thought that was the best tool that could have been used, was that Reader's Theater of type. I thought it was effective, and I thought it was that it hit the points, and it was on. I think so.
Again, I would say probably, about an 8, 8.5. And the reason I say that is because I'm not sure that there was a lot of focus on race as an issue. I think the main focus was on HIV and stigma as a professional. So.
Okay, so I have 2 more questions to ask you. Would you recommend Reader's Theater to convey information on stigmatized issues?
How about around the here?
Yeah. Okay.
Unanimous.
So.
The story came to life.
Okay.
All your research work came to life.
Okay. So the last question that I have is, what are some of the key issues that the Reader's Theater brought out?
Okay. On one key point was when they talk about the MSM population and dealing with the homophobia and the racism, you know, being black and being gay. And I do an intervention that deals exactly with that. So those were good points that I really think about as far as it's the gay community. And especially as being if you're a black gay man, then that's exactly what you have to deal with. Not only do you deal with the racism, but the homophobia behind it.
Well, one thing that's, like I said earlier, I was surprised at how many people apparently have been asked if they're HIV positive. And so it makes me wonder, are white people just that hung up, or they're afraid to ask? Because I know they think it.
Yeah.
And I don't
usually.
Yeah. So.
You're not that face, though. Yeah. You know, mine is.
Maybe you think that's part of what's going on?
Yeah. Definitely, that's right. Yeah.
So that's something that I got out, a key issue that I'm astonished and stunned that so many of the people that you interviewed were actually asked outright. I do know, as I told you when you interviewed me, that some of the volunteers that worked with me were accused by their families or their faith communities. Mm-hmm. And I say it that way, they weren't asked, they were accused of being HIV positive, and I was horrified, but I'm even more saddened to hear about how many people who work in the field are asked that question. So
I tell you what I thought was really powerful, and it hit home. They made the remarks about the funding change when the face changed, when it became the what they call the black disease and not everyone's disease, and it could touch anyone. It doesn't have to be just the black face, but it's everybody's disease. And they said that the funding changed when the face changed, which is true. So that was hit, and that was, to me, that was powerful. And I even remember watching television. We were talking about how they fund all these things. I heard about all these funders in the park for the dogs and the balloons and all this crazy stuff. I said, really? And here you have people dying, and you want to cut all this funding for a human being who has a soul, but we'll go spend money on the balloon, the dog festival. And then, don't get me wrong, I have no problems against dogs and all this stuff. And I even heard someone said that if a black person was dying on the streets, they would stop first for that dog first before they did that. I was like, wow. But that's how people think, and it's sad, but to know that the funding changed when the face changed, it's sad. And that's why we have to continue with the fight and continue to pray and all of that, because it did change. And that's a sad thing, because my life should just be like someone else's life. And the thing about it, it is not a black disease, but it's everyone's disease. It has no face. I mean, it has all of our faces on it, not just a black face, but everybody's face, and everybody could be at risk, because how many times have so many people had sex without caution or without, protection. Thank you, protection. And that means it knows. I mean, it knows it could be anybody's disease or everybody's face.
Some of the key issues I thought that came to light for me was stigma and the isolation that results from stigma. And I think one of the things that kind of stood out to me was, the person as the presenter, after the reading was over, I thought about that person as representing, systems, because stigma is not individual, it's in our systems, it's in our infrastructure. And so when people are asking, do you have HIV? I've had legislators ask me if I'm HIV positive. And I think, though, that it is because of our systemic racism and our perceptions of who is living with HIV. And honestly, I really think when I have been asked that, people didn't think it was out of the way question. Yeah. And I really think they probably felt that they were coming from a place of compassion. And so one of the things that you said, that funding changed when the face of HIV changed, the compassion changed also. The compassion changed. We used to have, our agency is 30 years old. In 2015, PALS will be 30 years old. So we have historical documentation. So if you look at in our archives from 1985, you'll see that stories about people with HIV were on the front page of the state paper. They had series, weeks long, of stories about people living with HIV. And I look at those people in those pictures, and they don't look like the majority of the people that we are currently serving, but now you don't see those weekly series about people with HIV. When HIV is on the news, it's because it's World AIDS Day. Yeah. And everybody that works in an AIDS service organization knows you get 900 calls from the media on World AIDS Day. But any other day, nobody calls. Nobody wants the story. And on that day, they want to talk to somebody living with HIV. But any other day, we don't get those calls. When we send stories or press releases out, they may or may not get in the paper. And if they do, they're certainly not on the front page. So not only did funding change, compassion change, our context of HIV and how it fits in our communities has changed. And it has become one of those things that, we don't have to think about. I actually had a person who is involved in the HIV field say to me a couple of years ago when we went to the State House to rally about the ADAP. And remember, we had this group of women who came, and I'm not going to call the name of the group, but you know who I'm talking about, this group of women who came carrying their signs, wearing their shirts, on the State House grounds. And the next day, this person called me and said, yes, I saw you down there, and all I thought was the legislators are going to look out the window and see a whole bunch of black homeless people on the State House steps, and nothing is going to change. So that's how institutional our stigma against HIV, particularly when it comes to people of color, that's how. I mean, that person had no problem making that comment to me and went right ahead talking about a fundraiser that we were getting ready to do. So, I mean, I just think that it's so, it's so inbred, and I think it's so hard to separate how our society feels about vulnerable people, people of color, people who live in poverty, and HIV. So I'm done. Okay. I talked a long time. I'm sorry.
I want to just piggyback on that when you talked about the funding and the face being changed. And I remember when we first heard about HIV, I think the first person I heard about was Liberace. And then as the virus went from being a white male gay to African American heterosexual, and the funding didn't change. Not only that, but as the epidemic moved toward the South, the funding didn't follow. The funding didn't follow the epidemic.
Definitely has not followed.
Yeah, it has not followed the epidemic.
Yeah, because 50% of the new infections are
Exactly.
here in the South and have been for a good while, and
Exactly.
yet most of the money's still going up north and out
Still
west.
going up, yeah.
Tier 1
Yeah.
group,
Yeah.
which is mostly those major cities up north,
Yes.
not
Mhm.
in the South.
Correct.
But they think if they give some money to Atlanta, that's the South.
That's the South. That's the South.
Or Miami.
That's right.
Mhm.
Miami,
Yeah.
exactly. Which is
Yeah.
so not the South. That's not South.
Yes.
And why is this so? I can't answer that. Can you help me?
Why? So that because the money is not coming to the South? I think for a lot of reasons. I think, first of all, most of the poverty is concentrated in the South. I mean, I don't want to say concentrated, but it's spread out among the South. Early on in the epidemic, they looked only at numbers, how many people had HIV, rather than ratios based on population size. So there's not a lot of major cities in the South unless you're looking at Atlanta or you're looking at Miami, maybe Houston or Dallas, I'm not sure. But so places like Columbia, Jackson, Mississippi, we weren't in those huge, we weren't able to report those huge numbers of people living with HIV because our populations weren't large, and they weren't looking at it based on per 100,000 or whatever the population was. So when that original funding framework was set up, it looked like we didn't have that big of a problem. But when the public health people got in there and really began to analyze the data and look at the burden, disease burden, rather than sheer numbers, they began to see that we really have a problem in the South. But by that time, of course, money had already been allocated to these large cities, LA and all these places. They didn't want to give up that money. And so that has been a real fight for many years. I mean, that, how do you redirect money from the South? I remember how people would want to return to South Carolina from New York, and they would call us to try to get their services set up, and they'd talk about how they could get massages and all of this fancy stuff, and I would just say, you know what, stay there, because we don't have that. We can't pay your rent for years and years. You can only get X number of prescriptions filled per month. I mean, they really had not only Cadillac services, they had limousine services, and we were barely in a Chevy, I don't know, a Pinto, yeah. And that's just that is how it has been. We are still fighting. We've been fighting for a number of years to try to reverse that with limited success, but not the kind of success that we need to save the people's lives in the South and give them the same quality of life that others have had. I mean, we've never had dog walking services for our people living with HIV. I mean, even things as simple as home delivered meals have been a struggle. So,
Just lastly, that the Ryan White Care Act, which has saved so many lives and made so many people healthy, is 20 years old this year in 2014, but it's using 20-year-old thinking, and that's what Carmen is referencing, is that it's still the formation, the structure that was set up for funding is the same thing that it was currently. as it was back in 1994 when the program was begun, which was sending the major money to where the biggest numbers are, not the per capita, but the biggest raw numbers. The big cities up north and out west, and yet for, I think it's roughly about 8 years or so, 50% of the new infections have been here in the South. So one of my primary goals is to get people mobilized to fight, because the only way that any funding got put into HIV back in the 80s was when so many white gay men and other gay men of color fought like crazy. They were out doing advocacy in front of pharmaceutical companies, in front of state houses in Washington, D.C., and we've got to get that kind of fervor going again. We've got to fight. So thank you, Chris, for that play, for making it so palpable of what we're fighting against.
Yeah. So I want to wrap up, because we've been here for a long time now. But a few things really stood out from what you said. One, that racism is a factor that influences the stigmatization of people working in the HIV field, African Americans specifically, that a lot of HIV care providers experience stigma, and that what was portrayed in the Regis Theater was not uncommon. The other thing that stood out is that stigma affects your work in many ways. The stigma also affects your social life. Like you said, the isolation that you experience. You remember, the isolation that you experience. There are other ways in which the real theater portrayed how stigma affects your social life. For example, where you are invited to, people are invited for a program, and then because they identified as people working in the HIV field, they immediately assume that they are HIV positive. So they can't really socialize the way they normally would. And the other thing that stood out is, in the case of the person who refused to sign the paperwork, you all know the legalities involved. If you have to counsel somebody and that person refuses to sign the consent form, if you go ahead and counsel that person, you are putting your job at risk, because should anything happen, they will hold you responsible for violating somebody's rights. So that's just one of many examples where this affects work. We saw how people refuse to clean carpets because they saw stains on the carpet. This is supposed to enhance work and a whole lot of things. So it is clear from the play and from what you have said that stigma affects your social life, it affects your work, and that stigma is real, and race plays a major role in the stigmatization of African Americans, mostly in terms of discrimination in the area of funding. So I want to close by saying thank you very much. I really appreciate the time that you made to be here. I wish we had a greater number here, but I think we have still been able to achieve what I set out to achieve. And I want to thank you very much again for the commitment. It is almost as if we are working together. I can see that this is not a favor you are doing to me. You are doing it because you feel this work is important, and that's why you are here. And I'm grateful for that. Thank you once again.